Photographs are windows to the past. They capture moments in time, frozen forever on paper or glass. We trust them as documents of fact, as irrefutable evidence of what once was. A photograph does not lie. It simply shows what stood before the lens. But what happens when a photograph presents something impossible? What happens when the truth captured in silver contradicts every record, every document, every piece of evidence we have? This is the story of one such photograph and the man who appeared in two places at once. In 1905, a stark black and white image emerged from the Arctic. It showed a group of haggard men huddled together on an ice floe, their faces etched with exhaustion and cold. The photograph, titled "The Icebound Party," became one of the most famous images of polar exploration. For decades, it stood as a powerful record of human endurance in the face of nature's cruelty. The men in the photo were anonymous heroes, their individual names lost to time. Then, in 1983, something extraordinary happened. One man in the back row was finally identified. His name was Wells. There was only one problem. Wells was never in the Arctic. The identification came from Annabelle, a woman researching her family history in the early 1980s. She was looking through old books about polar exploration when she saw the photograph. Her eyes locked on one figure in the back row. Her heart stopped. She knew that face. It was her grandfather, Wells. She was absolutely certain. Annabelle contacted the university archive that held the original photograph. She sent them family portraits of Wells from the same time period. The resemblance was perfect. The facial structure matched exactly. The eyes were identical. The shape of the jaw, the set of the mouth, every detail aligned. Historians at the archive were thrilled. After decades, they could finally put a name to this face. They provisionally updated their records. A mystery solved, except it was not solved at all. The truth was far stranger than anyone could have imagined. Wells had never set foot in the Arctic. Records proved he was working as a clerk in London during the entire expedition. He had never missed a week of work. Pay stubs confirmed his presence at a shipping firm throughout 1905 and 1906. So how could a man be captured on a glass plate negative in the high Arctic while simultaneously sitting at a desk in England? This paradox threatened to unravel everything historians thought they knew about the expedition. It called into question the authenticity of the most famous photograph from that journey. The investigation that followed would reveal a secret buried for nearly a century. The expedition in question began in the spring of 1905. It was led by Stephen, a renowned Arctic explorer who had already made his name charting unknown territories in the far north. The goal was ambitious. Stephen and his crew would push further into the Arctic than anyone had gone before. They would map coastlines that existed only as blank spaces on European maps. The ship, HMS Endeavour, departed from Portsmouth in April with high hopes and full provisions. But the Arctic is unforgiving. By October, the HMS Endeavour was trapped in pack ice. The ship could not move. The crew faced a desperate winter locked in the ice, fighting for survival in temperatures that dropped to 40 degrees below zero. The expedition photographer was Xander. He had been hired specifically to document the journey. Xander was meticulous in his work. He used heavy glass plate negatives, the most advanced photographic technology of the time. Each image required careful preparation and precise exposure. Despite the brutal conditions, Xander continued to work. He captured the crew's struggle, the endless ice, and the slow passage of the dark winter months. His most famous image was the Icebound Party, taken in January 1906. It showed the entire crew assembled on the ice beside their trapped ship. The men looked exhausted but defiant. This photograph, along with dozens of others, was carefully preserved. When the expedition finally returned to England in the summer of 1906, Xander's glass plates were transferred to the university archive. They were considered pristine historical records, untouched and authentic. For decades, those photographs sat in the archive. Researchers studied them. Books reproduced them. The faces in the images remained mostly anonymous, known only as crew member or able seaman. Then came Annabelle's letter in 1983. She was certain the man in the photograph was Wells, her grandfather. The archive staff compared her family portraits to the figure in the back row. The match was undeniable. They began the process of updating their records. This is when Raymond entered the story. Raymond was a young researcher at the university archive. He was assigned to finalize the identification and update the official documentation. It should have been a simple task. Confirm the name, update the database, close the file. But Raymond was thorough. He started with the basics. He pulled the crew manifest for the HMS Endeavour. He scanned the list of names. Wells was not on it. Raymond checked again. He went through every name carefully. No Wells. He thought perhaps the name had been misspelled or abbreviated. He checked variations. Nothing matched. This was the first red flag. Raymond expanded his search. He examined the private journals of Stephen, the expedition leader. Stephen had kept detailed daily logs throughout the journey. He recorded the weather, the ice conditions, and the activities of his crew. Raymond read every entry from 1905 and 1906. Stephen never mentioned anyone named Wells, not once. This was deeply unusual. An Arctic expedition was a small community. Everyone knew everyone. If Wells had been there, Stephen would have written about him, but the name simply did not appear. Raymond shifted his investigation. If Wells was not in the Arctic records, where was he? He turned to civilian records in London. This is where the story took an even stranger turn. Raymond found employment ledgers from a London shipping firm. Wells had worked there as a clerk. The ledgers were comprehensive. They showed his salary, his attendance, and his duties. According to these records, Wells had been at his desk in London throughout 1905 and 1906. He had not taken any extended leave. He had not traveled. He had simply worked, week after week, in a London office. The records were clear and official. They were as trustworthy as the photograph itself. Raymond now faced a logical impossibility. The photograph was real. Experts had examined the original glass plate negative. The emulsion, the grain, the light sources, everything was consistent with a single, unaltered exposure. The figure in the back row had been physically standing on the ice when Xander took the picture, but the man identified in that photograph had been in London. He had never left England. Raymond was staring at a paradox. The photo told one truth. The documents told another. Both could not be correct. Yet both appeared to be. Raymond began testing theories. His first thought was that the photograph might be fake. Composite photography existed in 1905. It was possible, though difficult, to combine multiple images into one. Perhaps someone had inserted Wells into the scene later. Raymond consulted photo experts at the archive. They brought out specialized equipment. They re-examined the glass plate under magnification. They analyzed the shadows, the focus, the depth of field. Their conclusion was definitive. The negative was authentic. It was a single, continuous exposure. No one had been added or removed. The figure was really there when the shutter opened. Raymond moved to his second theory. Could Wells have been a stowaway? Arctic expeditions were not passenger cruises. Every member of the crew was documented. Supplies were calculated precisely. An extra person meant an extra mouth to feed, and in the Arctic, that could mean the difference between survival and starvation. A stowaway would have been discovered immediately. Stephen would have documented it in his journal. There would have been consequences, likely severe ones, but no such documentation existed. The theory made no sense. Raymond discarded it. The third theory was the most logical. Simple mistaken identity. Annabelle was wrong. The man in the photograph just happened to look like Wells. It was a doppelganger, a random crew member who bore a striking resemblance to her grandfather. Raymond presented this theory to Annabelle. She refused to accept it. She had grown up looking at photographs of her grandfather. She knew his face as well as her own. This was not a look-alike. This was him. The certainty in her voice was unshakable. Raymond was stuck. The evidence pointed in impossible directions. The photograph was real. The employment records were real. The family's conviction was real. Something fundamental was missing from the picture. Weeks passed. Raymond felt he was circling the same dead end over and over. The photo was authentic. The man was there. The man identified was not. He realized he had been asking the wrong questions. The problem was not with the photograph. The problem was not with the expedition. The problem was with his understanding of Wells himself. Raymond changed his approach. He stopped investigating the Arctic journey and started investigating the family. Raymond went to public records. He searched for birth certificates from the 1880s. He found the birth certificate for Wells. It was filed in 1884 in a London parish. But as Raymond examined the records from that day, he found something else. Right next to Wells' certificate was another one, filed on the same day, same parents, same address. Wells was not an only child. He had been born with a twin brother, an identical twin. His brother's name was Hector. Raymond stared at the document. Everything suddenly made sense. He immediately contacted Annabelle. When he told her about Hector, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. She had never heard that name before. She had no idea Wells had a twin brother. Raymond asked her to speak with older relatives, anyone who might remember family stories from that era. Annabelle made calls. She visited elderly cousins. Slowly, the story emerged. Hector had been the black sheep of the family. While Wells was dutiful and reliable, Hector was wild and reckless. He ran away to sea when he was 16 years old. He signed on with merchant ships, then whaling vessels, then anything that would take him further from home. The family was ashamed. In that era, a son who abandoned his family brought disgrace. Hector's parents disowned him. They stopped speaking his name. They removed his photographs from the house. By the time Wells had children of his own, Hector had been erased from the family story. When Annabelle was born decades later, it was as if Hector had never existed. Raymond now had a new name to search for. He returned to the expedition archives with fresh purpose. He pulled the crew manifest for the HMS Endeavour once more. This time, he was not looking for Wells. He was looking for Hector. And there, on the list of able seamen, was the name. Hector had been part of the crew. He had sailed north with Stephen and Xander. He had been trapped in the ice. He had survived the brutal winter. He had stood on that ice floe in January 1906 when Xander took the photograph. The paradox was solved. The man in the photograph had never been Wells. It was his identical twin brother, Hector. Xander had captured the forgotten brother on the ice, his face weathered by cold and hardship. Decades later, Annabelle had seen that photograph. She had recognized the face instantly. It was her grandfather's face. But she had no way of knowing that an identical version of that face had existed. She had no way of knowing about the disowned twin who had been erased from family memory. Raymond documented his findings. He wrote a detailed report explaining the confusion and presenting the evidence. The university archive officially corrected their records. The figure in the back row of the Icebound Party was no longer listed as Wells. He was given his true name, Hector. The forgotten twin was finally acknowledged, nearly 80 years after his image had been captured on glass. The story raises important questions about how we understand history. The photograph had been telling the truth all along. It was an honest record of who stood on the ice that day. But the human story, the family memory, had been incomplete. Hector had been deliberately forgotten, cut out of the narrative by shame and social pressure. Without his name in the family tree, his existence became invisible. When his face appeared in a famous photograph, no one could identify him because no one remembered he had lived. This case also reveals how easily the past can be misunderstood. Annabelle was not wrong to identify the face in the photograph. She was completely correct. It was the face of her family, the face she had known all her life. Her only mistake was not knowing that face had belonged to two men. The resemblance between identical twins is not approximate. It is exact. Even trained observers can struggle to tell them apart. A photograph captures what the camera sees, but it cannot capture context or identity. That must come from records, from memory, from the stories families choose to tell or choose to hide. The investigation also highlights the importance of primary sources. Raymond could have stopped at the family identification. It seemed convincing. The resemblance was perfect. But he checked the manifest. He read the journals. He followed the evidence even when it led to contradictions. Those contradictions forced him to dig deeper, to question his assumptions, to look beyond the obvious answer. The truth was hidden in documents that seemed unrelated. A birth certificate filed in London had nothing to do with Arctic exploration, yet it contained the key to the entire mystery. Today, the photograph, The Icebound Party, hangs in the university archive with updated documentation. The figure in the back row is labeled with his correct name. Visitors can read about Hector, the able seaman who joined Stephen's expedition and survived the winter in the ice. They can also read about the decades of confusion that followed and how his own family forgot he existed. The photograph is the same as it always was. Only our understanding of it has changed. The case of Hector serves as a powerful reminder that history is not just about records and archives. It is about human choices. It is about what gets remembered and what gets forgotten. It is about the stories families tell and the secrets they bury. Hector was written out of his family's history by shame. He disappeared from memory while his image remained frozen in silver, waiting for someone to ask the right questions. His face was hidden in plain sight for nearly 80 years. The truth was always there. It just needed someone willing to look beyond the surface. What other secrets might be hidden in the backgrounds of old photographs? How many forgotten faces stare out at us from history, their names lost, their stories erased? Every photograph is a fragment of truth, but truth without context can be misleading. The camera captures what is there, but it cannot tell us why it is there or who those people really were. That knowledge must be pieced together from documents, memories, and the persistence of researchers who refuse to accept easy answers. Hector's story was nearly lost forever. It survived only because one researcher noticed a name was missing from a list and decided to find out why.